Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York in Bayside, Queens. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. We want to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us today as we commemorate Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. This commemoration is a powerful reminder that both the catastrophe of, as well as lessons from the Holocaust, continue to reverberate both here and abroad. In keeping with this theme, our program today focuses on the inherent tensions in what we remember and how within our increasingly polarized society. But today is also a deeply somber reminder that the Holocaust isn't just a global abomination where 6 million Jewish people were vanquished from the planet, in addition to millions more people who were tortured and murdered by the Nazis because of anti-Semitism, racism, and xenophobia. Because when we speak in vast numbers, we can also forget that this horror befell regular people just like you and me. Our program this evening, Remembering the Town Known as Auschwitz, is also the Rabbi Isidoro Eisenberg Memorial Lecture and is co-sponsored by the Center for Jewish Studies at Queens College and the Museum of Jewish Heritage. Rabbi Eisenberg was the longtime scholar in residence here at the KHC, who wrote as well as curated many of our center's most powerful exhibitions, including Cruel Correspondence, Anti-Semitic Postcards, and From the Star of Shame to the Star of Courage, The Story of the Yellow Star, just to name a few. But Rabbi Eisenberg's memory is not strictly confined to the past. He's also very much present, since the KHC has several student curatorial interns this semester who are finding new inspiration in his exhibits while conducting additional research. Because memory isn't static, it's constantly morphing, and the only way to keep the tragedy of the Holocaust alive is if we help young people understand why it's relevant in their lives, including its connection to other atrocities that have befell other populations. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Arnold Franklin, who is the director of the Center for Jewish Studies at Queens College.
Thank you, Laura. I'm Arnold Franklin, the director of the Queens College Center for Jewish Studies. For over 4 decades, the center has served as a leading community resource, bringing the very best of Jewish intellectual and cultural creativity to audiences on and off campus. The center prides itself on its close collaboration with other organizations within the college and in the greater New York area in offering lectures, symposia, film screenings, and artistic performances to the public. The center also supports the Jewish Studies program at Queens College, an interdisciplinary undergraduate program that offers a major and a minor, drawing on faculty from a broad array of disciplines, including anthropology, English, history, Middle East studies, music, philosophy, political science, religion, and sociology. The Jewish Studies program runs dozens of courses each year on topics ranging from the Bible and the ancient Near East to contemporary Judaism and the State of Israel. We are delighted to be joining forces with our neighboring institution, the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College, and with the Museum of Jewish Heritage in Manhattan in hosting tonight's program. I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Laura Cohen, Executive Director of the Kupferberg Center, for extending the invitation to partner on tonight's program. I also would like to acknowledge the endowment in memory of Rabbi Isidoro Eisenberg, for whom tonight's lecture is named. Before we introduce tonight's speakers, I will now recite the names of 5 Holocaust survivors in our community who died in the last 2 years. Please join me in paying tribute to their memory. Mendel Marin. Mendel was a regular attendee at the monthly Bagels and Talk event at the Kupferberg Center. Jacob Silverman. Jacob also regularly came to the Bagels and Talk event. Max Liebman. Max and his wife Hannah, who was 96, were survivors of the French village Le Chambon and were featured in the Kupferberg Center's exhibition, Conspiracy of Goodness. Rabbi Fabian Schoenfeld. Rabbi Schoenfeld's testimony is now part of the permanent exhibition at KHC. Irving Roth. Irving was a famous survivor who lived in the Queens area and once spoke at the KHC. May they rest in peace, and may their memory be a blessing.
Thank you so much, Arnold. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Tomek Kuntsevich and Maciek Zaborowski from the Auschwitz Jewish Center in Oświęcim, Poland, which has been a part of the Museum of Jewish Heritage since 2006. Tomek is director of AJC and has lectured extensively on preserving Jewish memory in Poland at the Holocaust Education Week in Toronto, the Cape Town Holocaust Center, and at conferences across the world. He has led extensive study programs on Holocaust history, Jewish history and heritage, as well as diversity education programs for international law enforcement groups, Polish teachers and educators, international graduate students like myself a few years ago, and US cadets and midshipmen. He studied Jewish history in Krakow, Budapest, and Jerusalem, Hebrew language at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and is a certified anti-discrimination educator in Poland. Maciek Zaborowski is head of education and special projects at the AJC. He's responsible for developing digital projects about the Jewish heritage of the town of Oświęcim, including the app known as Oświęcim. There's so many. Oświęcim, and an exhibition by the same title at the Google Arts and Culture platform. He also works for the FATSI Fellowships at Auschwitz for the Study of Professional Ethics program, and he is a former Polish representative of the International School of Holocaust Studies at Yad Vashem. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
I would like to welcome everybody on behalf of the Auschwitz Jewish Center. My name is Tomek Kuntsevich. Of course, a big thank you to Laura Cohen for the invite. A big thank you to the sponsors, Kupferberg Holocaust Center, Queens College, the Center for Jewish Studies, Museum of Jewish Heritage, our partner. We are very honored to be invited to run this program this on Yom HaShoah. And in a moment, we're gonna start the presentation, and Maciek will make this presentation. Then there will be some time for questions. So I hope we'll have also a discussion afterwards. So with no further ado, Maciek, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, Arnold, and Tomek. It's a great pleasure, and it's an honor and privilege to join you on this special day and on this special event. And I'd like to tell you a little bit, share with you the story of the local Jewish community of Oświęcim, but also I'd like to tell you and create an opportunity to ask questions about the work that we do, the daily work that we do to honor the Jewish heritage of the town of Oświęcim, which is mostly known under its German name, Auschwitz. You should be able to see my screen now, and the title photograph of this presentation, which was taken in the fall of 1939, most likely shortly after the beginning of World War II. After the Nazi German attack on Poland, when the war broke out, and the photo you're looking at is the photo of the Jewish street in Oświęcim, Ulica Żydowska, the Jewish street, which is the heart of the Jewish life of the town, known under the Polish name Oświęcim and the Jewish name Oświęcim. It was a town which at the time had the total population of 14,000, and 60% of the residents of the town at the time were Jews. So we argue that it's one of the least imaginable Jewish histories in the world because of what happened only roughly a year later after this photograph was taken. But before we delve deeper into the history of the Jewish community of Oświęcim, I wanted to make a connection with a very particular object from our collection, which actually an object or the context which connects pre-war Oświęcim with pre-war New York. And this is the object which I wanted to present to you in the first place. Now we're not using chat directly, but I just want to ask you to make a mental exercise and think for a moment about the associations which you may have with this photo. Maybe some of you will have an idea what what the bottle is about. It's an early 20th century bottle of an alcohol used for Shabbat in pre-war Święcim. This alcohol was called Shabbat Bronfen, and it was made in a very special factory of liquors in the town in pre-war Święcim. So it's a bottle, one of the many bottles which were used to distribute liquor to observe, which is used to observe Shabbat for a wine blessing. And the factory is actually the one which I want to elaborate a bit more about. The factory named after the owner, after the founder, Jacob Haberfeld. This is a view of the town of Oświęcim, again from early 20th century. This is the entrance to the town, the road which would take you into the old city. So the photo is taken from a river bridge, and in the right section of the photo, you can see a building, one of the many buildings of this particular factory, the Jacob Haberfeld factory of liquors, a steam factory of liquors and vodkas, which was a family business. It was established in 1804, so 150 years roughly before the photo was taken, and they were making all kinds of liquors and also fruit juice, which became, especially in 20th century, became famous all over Europe. Those were alcohols of supreme quality, which were sold all over Europe, to the extent that in late 1930s, the owners of this factory, a descendant of the founder, Alphonse Haberfeld, and his wife Felicia, were invited to participate in the International Fair in 1939. Here's this is a video testimony of Felicia. So this is the co-owner of the factory in pre-war Święcim. And in 1939, like I said, they were invited to participate in the International Fair, which at the time was supposed to take place in New York. This was a big event where everybody wanted to showcase their product. And the Haberfelds were supposed to be in the Polish delegation. They were chosen, selected to represent Poland with other business people and present their product in the Polish pavilion. So now you have to imagine that for an affluent couple, but still from a small Polish town of Oświęcim, this was really a big privilege. The problem though was that at the time, their first child was 2 years old. Franciszka was born in 1937, and she was just not old enough to travel. At the time, people would travel between the United States and Europe on a boat. This was a 2-week boat trip, so it was a serious thing. So the couple decided that they would their daughter would stay with her grandmother in Kraków, in the nearby. It's a major city close to Oświęcim, and they went on a ship and they traveled to New York and they took part in the fair. If you Google International Fair 1939, you'll get historical archival photographs from that fair in New York. And then once the fair was over, this was summer, this was end of August 1939, the Haberfelds, so Alphonse and Felicia, were among the few travelers from that ship who decided to return to Poland. Obviously, they wanted to reunite with their daughter. And what you're going to see in a moment is a very short piece of a testimony by Felicia Haberfeld. This was recorded for the USC Shoah Foundation in the early 1990s, and Felicia is describing the very moment when she was on the ship with her husband returning to Poland, and you will hear about the moment when World War II broke out. So please watch and listen.
My husband said, I am going because I have everything and everybody there. So no matter what, we are going. And sure enough, a small group of our people left. About 48 hours before we reached the port of Gdynia, we were watching a movie. One night was a movie, one night was a dance. That night was a movie. with Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. I remember vividly. The film was interrupted, and the purser came on the stage, and he asked to please be quiet and control yourself. He has something to announce, and the announcement said that our ship no longer is going to Poland, but has been taken by the British Admiralty, and we are heading toward someplace we didn't know where. I don't think he knew where either. Well, what was happening there I'll never forget. Women were getting hysterical, screaming, crying. Men were fainting. It was something terrible. And I was sitting like a stone. I just couldn't move. There were a whole group of Polish priests and nuns traveling. And they all got on their hands and knees, and they gave first aid to those who fainted. And since that time on, our odyssey started. We never made it home.
So Felicia and Alphonse indeed never made it home. On their way back, when the travel was interrupted, the ship was ultimately diverted to Scotland by the British Navy, and after 2 weeks of quarantine, all passengers had to go on land, and that was it. There was no way for people who were on that ship, there was no way for them to return to Poland, because Poland by that time had been attacked by Nazi Germany. The Nazi Navy was in control of parts of the Baltic Sea and the Polish coast. So Felicia and Alphonse remained stuck in Scotland, trying to extract their daughter. They went out of their way. They actually tried to pay for someone from that ship to go to Poland and take the daughter out, but there was just no way. The daughter remained with her grandmother, like I said, in Krakow, the major city. That city was also occupied by the Germans, by the Nazis. Soon a ghetto was created in the city of Krakow, and both the daughter and her grandmother were forced to live in that ghetto. They survived through extreme hardships. And during one of the deportations from the ghetto to the death camps, their hideout was found, and they were both sent to a death center and Bełżec and were murdered. So you can see the pre-war photo of Franciszka, the girl on the left, and what you can see on the right is a memorial stone, which was dedicated 2 years ago on the site of the former Jacob Haverfeld factory and house in Oświęcim. There's a memorial stone. Some of you may be familiar with the concept of the so-called stumbling stones, known in German as the Stolpersteine. It's a German memorial concept of commemorating individuals who were victims of the Holocaust or victims of the Nazi persecution by placing their names and a brief description of the circumstances of their life and death in the form of brass stumbling stones. And this is exactly what it is. It says, here lived Franciszka Henryka Haberfeld, born in 1947, who was imprisoned in the Krakow ghetto in 1941 and then was murdered in Bełżec, in death center at Bełżec in 1942. So the Haberfeld family is remembered with that stone, with this kind of remembrance stone in the town of Oświęcim. Now, the modern day Oświęcim is a town with a population of almost 40,000 people, so it's tripled compared to the pre-war population. This is the view of the market square. So, in European terms, market squares are usually heart centers of the town, and this is a modern day view of the market square of Oświęcim. For those of you who are interested, the distance to the former camps of Auschwitz is around 2 miles. So you cannot see the former camps from the town. This is the actual town itself, and it has not changed. It has not changed much since the pre-war period. This is a postcard, a colored postcard from the interwar period, so between World War I and World War II, of the market square. So again, this is the period when 60% of the town's population was Jewish. So more than every other resident would go to pray in a synagogue. Today, the Jewish population of Oświęcim is 0. I'll tell you a bit more about the last Jewish resident in a moment, who passed away in the year 2000. Since 2000, the town does not have any Jewish residents, and it's so happened that in the same year, the Auschwitz Jewish Center, our institution, was established, and you can see the buildings on this photograph. And the building on the left, the yellowish one, is the only synagogue left in Oświęcim today, the Chevra Lomdei Mishnayot, which is operated by our center. It's one of the former around 20 Jewish sites of prayer of pre-war Oświęcim, the only one which has survived. And the building on the right, the white one, is part of the Jewish Museum, which preserves the Jewish history of the town of Oświęcim. Now, the synagogue survived to this day miraculously. It was during the war, it was desecrated. It was used by the Nazis as an ammunition warehouse. And this is ironically or paradoxically what saved the building. This is a photo here. You can see the photo of the interior. And the interior was obviously renovated in the year 2000, and after a ceremony of rededication, the synagogue was reopened. So for 20 years now, it's been serving visitors as a site of prayer, because, like I said, the town does not have, it neither has a Jewish community nor even a single Jewish resident. So whenever it's used for prayers, it's used by visitors. On this photograph, you can see the person in the middle wearing a tallit, a prayer shawl. This is the chief rabbi of France, who regularly visits every year the synagogue and our center. But for most of the time, the synagogue is a historical monument, a site to visit, a site that we use for education and for cultural purposes. And next to the synagogue, there's also a museum here, and a space, a bifunctional space, which combines, this is the former women's section of that synagogue, which now houses part of the museum which tells the history of the 400 years of Jewish presence in Oświęcim, because the history of that particular Jewish community goes back 400 years to 16th century. So it's actually 4 centuries of Jewish presence in Oświęcim, and we use this opportunity, we use this space to talk about the long Jewish presence, the relationships between Jews and non-Jews, which in this case means Roman Catholics. We host until the pandemic, we would host around 30,000 people annually, mostly from Poland, Germany, Europe, and also the United States and in Israel. In this photograph, you can see this is a group of Polish teachers who are participating in a human rights program of the Auschwitz Jewish Center, and they're being taken around our museum. Next to the museum and the synagogue, we also maintain the Jewish cemetery. We take care of the Jewish cemetery in Oświęcim, which is no longer active. This is a 19th century cemetery, which during the war and during the Holocaust was completely destroyed. The Matzevot, you can see, this is an aerial view, and you can see the tombstones. The Matzevot, they were brought back by survivors and also non-Jewish residents of Oświęcim after the war, because during the war, that area was razed to the ground completely in connection with the establishment of the synthetic rubber and gas factory in Monowitz, part of the Auschwitz complex. A road was actually constructed on parts of the grounds of the cemetery, and the whole cemetery was destroyed by the Nazis. And after the war, like I said, it was renovated, and since the year 2000, we're taking care of it. We're making it available to visitors. We documented the inscriptions from the tombstones. So we have a list. We maintain a list of people who are buried, and we take care of the cemetery itself. And we're not the only ones. We are helping this maintenance of the cemetery, both by the town of Oświęcim, the municipality, and also American soldiers or future military leaders who are participating in one of our signature programs organized with the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, namely the American Service Academies program, which annually brings together a group of 14 cadets and mids, future military leaders from the 4 academies. So it's Army, Air Force, Coast Guard, and Navy. And following their preparation in New York and Washington in Museum of Jewish Heritage and United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, they come to Poland to study the history of the Holocaust, to study and witness the sites of mass murder of Jews and other victims of Nazism, both Auschwitz and also other sites, in order to learn to become better leaders, in order to develop their military ethics, learning from the wrongdoings of the Nazi military. So that's one of our, like I said, of our signature programs. Next to the synagogue and the museum and the cemetery, we're also maintaining the house of the last Jewish resident of Oświęcim. The building on the right, called Cafe Brixton, is and you can see in this photo, you can see it in the bottom left section. This is the house of the last Jewish resident. The Klugers were a regular Jewish family who lived in pre-war Oświęcim, a family of 11. So it was a couple who had 9 kids, and there's only 3 children who survived. 2 of them emigrated to New York right after the war. One of them went to Sweden, then came back. And from 1961 until his passing in the year 2000, he was the last Jewish resident. His family, when he passed away, his family donated the house, which was in a very terrible condition, and it was renovated by our foundation. And right now it's a cafe, but also an exhibition space and a space for cultural events, where we organize events both related to Jewish history and Jewish culture, but also human rights and the connection between the two. And most of our visitors, of our guests for those events, are local residents of the town of Oświęcim, for whom we organize various kinds of memorial and cultural events. The photo you can see right now, this is one of the anniversaries of the deportation of Jews from Oświęcim, one of the Holocaust memorial events. And you can see the residents who are gathered in front of the synagogue, and they're looking at the candles they arranged a moment before. The candles say in Polish, "We remember," and in Polish and in Hebrew it says "Pamiętamy" and "Zochrim," which means we remember. This was an event where the residents arranged those candles in order to show that they remembered the pre-war Jewish residents who were taken away during the war, first to the neighboring cities of Będzin, Sosnowiec, and Chrzanów, where the ghettos were created for them. And then later, most of those people were transported to Auschwitz, and they were murdered in the suburb of their hometown in a Nazi German concentration camp and death camp of Auschwitz and Birkenau. So there was a cultural program, and a photo was taken of the situation with the text, with the message, and that message was printed on postcards and was sent to Israel to survivors and their families, to show that there is a living connection between today's Oświęcim and its pre-war Jewish resident. This is an example of many of events of this kind, and I want to elaborate a bit more about another one. But before this happens, let me just share images of the 4 publications about the Jewish past of Oświęcim, about the Oshpitzin, so the Jewish Oświęcim. This is a guidebook, a printed guidebook. This is a catalog of our exhibit, the green one. Then there's a guidebook to the Jewish cemetery, which I showed you a moment ago. And there's also a collection of graphic novels, 7 stories connected with the objects from our exhibit, which take the form of graphic novels about, it's called Oświęcimskie Historie, so the stories from Oświęcim. All of our publications are bilingual, and they can also be purchased from our museum store. Laurie kindly mentioned the digital project that we run. One of them was organized and is still available to be viewed. It was organized in partnership with the Google Arts and Cultural platform, and this is an online exhibit. These are highlights from our core exhibition, which talks about the 400 years of Jewish presence. And you can browse our exhibit, the highlights from our collection with curatorial comments. This is also available in English, obviously. And then we also have the app called Oshpitzin. So, and again, the Jewish name of Oświęcim. This is a guide. This is a twofold app which offers a guide to our museum in 4 languages: in Polish, English, Hebrew, and German. And this is also a guide to the town of Oświęcim. So you can take both physical but also a virtual guided tour of the town itself. And each of the sites, as you can see on the screenshot, each of the almost 20 sites has both modern day photographs and historical photographs and explanations in both text and sound in 4 languages. So you'll be able, when you decide to download, which is highly encouraged, this free app, which is available both for iPhone and iPhone/iPad and Android devices, you'll be able to not only to virtually travel and see the Jewish Oświęcim and sites which are oftentimes no longer there, but you also will be able to see what the town looks like, today. In the app, we also dedicate a special space to a historical site of the great synagogue. The Great Synagogue was, as the name suggests, the most important Jewish house of prayer in Prior Oświęcim, which was, by the way, founded on the site of the first ever synagogue from 1588. So there was this 19th century beautiful neo-Moorish building. You can see it, right? The huge facade. If you take a closer look and you compare the proportions between the building, the one on the left, and the people who are leaving it, you'll notice that it was a serious synagogue located just outside of the market square in the Jewish street, which was already mentioned. This is a postcard from early 20th century, and you'll also notice, looking at it closely, you'll notice that the text is written at the bottom, is written in German and in Polish, and that's because the photo was taken during the time when Oświęcim, at the in early 20th century, was part of the Austrian Empire. So there's this beautiful synagogue, which is one of the 20 Jewish houses of prayer in Prior Oświęcim, and sadly, it did not survive to this day. The Great Synagogue of Oświęcim was destroyed 2 months following the German invasion of Poland, and the end of November 1939, and then less than half a year later, prisoners of Auschwitz. Once the camp of Auschwitz was established initially as a concentration camp, prisoners were used as forced labor to do construction and demolition work all around the area, and one of their assignments was to continue the demolition of the Great Synagogue of Oświęcim. So the picture, it's a very unique photograph that you're looking at right now. You can see one of the first prisoners of Auschwitz in mid-1940s. So this is most likely June 1940, and these are people who are sent as part of their forced labor assignment, they were sent to continue the demolition. And you can see they're working with bare hands, with no protection. And the wall you can see in the left portion, in the left section of the picture of this photograph, is the remaining wall of the Great Synagogue, which soon after this photo was taken was taken down, and then for several decades there was just an empty piece of land, which was then commemorated by our center in the year 2000 with a memorial plaque. And only recently we completed a project of the proper commemoration, a large-scale commemoration of the Great Synagogue of Oświęcim. This is an aerial view taken in the winter of 2019, 80 years after the Great Synagogue of Oświęcim was destroyed. On the 80th anniversary of the destruction in the end of November, 2 years ago, we unveiled the Great Synagogue Memorial Park, which is an art and commemoration project which honors the Jewish history and heritage of Oświęcim and this particular site. And in this aerial view, you can see how the memorial is structured. So this is an outline of the synagogue, and inside you can see these are scattered granite, scattered pieces of granite, and there's also a memorial object in the bottom left corner, which features a 3D object of the synagogue. This is a project which has already received a lot of international recognition, including a recent nomination for the European Union Prize in Architecture. And here you can see a photograph taken in the spring. We unveiled this memorial park during a very moving ceremony like I said, 2019, a ceremony which partly took place on the site, but it was inaugurated in the synagogue, in our synagogue, the Hebron-Dei Mishnayot synagogue, in presence of 50 members of families of mostly descendants of Jews from Oświęcim who traveled from the United States, Israel, and also Europe. And coming to the end of my presentation, before we continue to your questions, which we'd be very happy to answer, I would like to show you a short clip from that event, which features the ceremony of unveiling of the Memorial Park in presence of a survivor, Lea Gleitman, a woman born in Oświęcim before the war who attended a school, Beit Yaakov school in pre-war Oświęcim, survived the Holocaust, and lives in Sweden. And she traveled, being 90 plus, she traveled to Oświęcim to take part in our ceremony. So please stay with us for the clip.
W 1939 roku Wielka Synagoga stała w pobliżu rynku na dzisiejszej ulicy Berka Joselewicza, wtedy nazywanej ulicą Żydowską. Była naturalnym elementem krajobrazu naszego miasta. Przedwojenni mieszkańcy, chrześcijańscy i żydowscy, zapamiętali, że 3 maja i 11 listopada na fasadzie budynku wieszano biało-czerwone flagi, świętując polską konstytucję i niepodległość. W 2 miesiące od wybuchu II wojny światowej, w nocy z 29 na 30 listopada 1939 roku, niemieccy żołnierze podpalili i zniszczyli najważniejszą synagogę w Oświęcimiu. Dziś mija 80 lat od tych tragicznych wydarzeń.
Dzisiejsze otwarcie parku na miejscu Wielkiej Synagogi jest spełnieniem przez Centrum Żydowskie, ale myślę i przez nas wszystkich tych 3 słów: pamięć, edukacja i kultura. I za to chciałem serdecznie podziękować panu dyrektorowi, wszystkim pracownikom i wszystkim, którzy zaangażowali się właśnie w ten projekt i że wszyscy jesteśmy tutaj świadkami tej inicjatywy i efektów tejże pracy.
I no longer have anyone who shared my past that I can share my memories with. But here today, I can share my memories of my beloved family with all of you. Let them not be forgotten.
Thank you very much for your attention, and we'll be more than happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Maciek. Thank you so much, Tomek. I'm just trying to kind of catch my breath. I think that was the theme. I was a fellow with the AJC in 2017. Some of our colleagues are actually on the call this evening, and I think there were so many powerful things that happened, not the least of which was spending 3 weeks on the road with both of you, going to different sites of memory, going to execution sites, going to memorials, going to museums, and really understanding the hyper local memory. Even getting lost on a bus to go, I think, to, I'm not going to be able to pronounce it correctly, but the area where there was the mass graves of the shootings in the forest. And one of the first questions that I wanted to ask you is, you mentioned about 30,000 people come to AJC each year. About 1 million people before the pandemic hit go to the camp. And I was wondering if you could talk about the challenges of doing this work, and what are some of the tensions that arise when people come to the town?
Maybe I will start, and then Maciek may add if he wants. Well, this is, of course, a very unique location, right? I mean, of course, a lot of people who come to visit the site of Auschwitz very often do not know about the existence of the town. And then when they know about the town, they also have very negative feelings about the town. So one can hear very often about, the kind of questions, how is it possible for people to live here, right? How is it possible to live in the town so much associated with the site of Auschwitz, with the symbol of the evil, of the symbol of the Holocaust. So there is this tension, the tension between the people who visit, the people who live in the town, and of course, now we know the town existed long before Auschwitz. People who live in the town today, and the town is in a way just a typical medium-sized town. And before the war, it was a typical small town where Jews and non-Jews lived for several centuries. There were good times, bad times. There was anti-Semitism, but there were also positive stories of living together. So it's really, I think, crucial to understand this challenge that place like Auschwitz happened next to a normal town. Because as a matter of fact, Oświęcim was not unique before the war. It was very typical, very quiet little town with Jews and non-Jews, with actually the Jewish majority. About 60% of the town was Jewish before the war. And this exactly happened. Auschwitz happened next to this normal place. And I think this is educationally very important to realize that these sort of, a genocide, right, can happen anywhere. And I think this should be, and that's why I think it's also crucial to visit the town and understand this reality, right? And not to try to escape from it, trying to sort of define the town as some sort of black hole in the middle of nowhere, because it's not. It's in the middle of Europe. And this horrible thing happened in the middle of Europe.
Yeah, if I may add just one more thing. I mean, just to reinforce what Tomek said. Indeed, a lot of people come to Oświęcim, into the area with a very strong preconceived notion, very negative image, right, or assumptions, which is, I think, perfectly understandable from a human standpoint. If you're planning to see a site of mass atrocity, negative emotions are very human. But it's just like Tomek said. At the same time, the challenge is to understand the complexities. Auschwitz as the camp, the concentration and death camp, was established in this area, not because of any pre-existing fierce anti-Semitism, right? Because that's part of the history. There was anti-Semitism in Poland and Oświęcim, just as there was in other parts of Europe and the world. But the reasons were actually purely pragmatic from the German Nazi standpoint. It was the railway nexus which was available. It was the two rivers, the confluence of the two rivers, which made it easy to isolate the area. It was also the pre-war Polish army military barracks, so there was the infrastructure. So there are some very concrete reasons why Auschwitz, why the decision was made that out of the many locations considered, the concentration camp would be built there. Nobody asked for Auschwitz to be built, right? And it's also, I think, important to know that there were also non-Jewish victims, right? And actually half of the non-Jewish population of Oświęcim was resettled, had to leave their homes, and some of those people actually ended up in Auschwitz for no reason. Even though they never opposed the Nazis as such, they were still sent to Auschwitz. And this is a story which is not so well known. And I think knowing this also changes the understanding a bit as well.
Thank you, Maciek. Thank you, Tomek, for that really amazing presentation. I want to ask about the local population. You showed that one slide of a vigil and mentioned that the local population participated in that and other events. Can you say something about the extent to which the legacy of the town weighs upon the population? You also mentioned that the population has grown considerably, so there's been a lot of demographic change. How does that relate to the memory of the town for those who live there full time?
Well, of course, anybody who lives on Oświęcim is aware of the existence of the site of Auschwitz. The question of Jewish history, I think, is more complex, because a lot of these people who live in Oświęcim today, they are descendants of people who came to the town after the war. There's a small percentage actually of people with actually roots in the town from before the war. So there is sort of no continuity in a way. There was a big chemical factory that was built during the German occupation, and then during communism, this was further developed and employed, I think, 12,000 people during communism. So this was sort of the main reason why so many people actually came to live in this town after the war. And the town grew so considerably. This is not sort of a typical situation. A lot of such towns, which before the war had a significant Jewish population, today are actually smaller, right? Because they lost such a big part of their populations. So actually our role, and this is what we very much believe in, is that we should integrate, right, the Jewish history into the general history of the town. And for the last 20 years, this is what we've been really doing, and also educating and also encouraging teachers to explore this history, right, and to look at the history of the town as the history of both Jews and non-Jews. And I think to a great extent, this is happening right now. I mean, there's also a local museum which includes the Jewish history, right? I mean, we are of course focused on the Jewish history, but as I said, this seems now that because of our work, the Jewish history has become to a great extent part of the memory of the town, right? Even this name Oshpitzin, which of course until we started to sort of promote it, really nobody knew about it. Now it has become part of the local memory. So I think Oświęcim in a way is unique because, of course, the location next to Auschwitz, because of greater interest, greater sensitivity. But as a matter of fact, all over Poland, since the fall of communism, so for the last 30 years, there have been a lot of local people, activists, various initiatives of people who try to commemorate the local Jewish histories. And this is part of this sort of reclaiming of this multicultural past of Poland, right? People today, I mean, the Polish society today is divided. I mean, the same way the American society is divided. And but there's a big part, a big segment of people who really, want to look at the history with sort of critical eye, but also inclusive, right? So they're inclusive of various people who lived in Poland for centuries, and Poland throughout the centuries was very diverse. I mean, today is relatively homogeneous, but this is a unique situation in the history of Poland.
I want to build on that because you're both Polish and you're doing this work, and you're not only helping students and all of the educators and that the people that you work with to understand sort of critically what's taking place sort of after we process the emotion of this, which is quite heavy. And you mentioned Polish society is very divided right now, but there's also war being waged and Holocaust distortion and the intimidation and trolling of very prominent historians. And I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, indeed, that's what's happening in Poland and also beyond. I mean, historical revisionism is indeed a thing. Speaking like on behalf of our institution, I can say that we have not been affected directly by such instances. We are very well aware that there are historians who are being attacked, who are receiving threats, and I mean their work is undermined, and this is of course despicable, and at the same time, again, not unique to the Polish context. Sadly, right? This is the challenge that a lot of us are facing. The attempts to rewrite history, the attempts to present facts in a selective way to try to shift away, any discussion about any responsibility or co-responsibility for the Holocaust. But like in our case, we believe that the grassroots work is very important, and it's about engaging with dialogue on a very local level for people to understand, to leave the national perspective, and rather than put people in a perspective in a situation where they feel they need to defend their national identity. It's much better to start from the local level to show that that the Jewish neighbors were actually neighbors, and they're also residents of the same town. So in order to if you want to work in the area of empathy, you need to focus on the likeness, on the fact that people shared the same streets, and that whatever was done to them was actually done to the community. So that's the angle that we're taking. It's not easy, right? It's not, like Tomek said, there's a lot of complexities, but it's a challenge of inviting people to go a bit deeper and further, and abandon their identity perspective and be human.
Yeah, if I just can add, this is of course this trend is of course related to these divisions, right? Yes, we are sort of facing this politicization of history, right? And sort of exploiting history for political purposes. And this we are now experiencing. But at the same time, this is sort of that it's as Maciek said. I mean, we have not been really in any way limited, yes, in what we do. I mean, we run trainings on xenophobia and on anti-Semitism, and this is happening, and we've been running these sort of programs for the law enforcement also recently. So this is again, there's a struggle, right? I mean, how this will end, I think we don't know. But also at the same time, part of this struggle is related to the kind of strong feeling among parts of the Polish society that the fate of the non-Jewish Poles during the war is not remembered enough outside of Poland, right? That the fate of Poland, the fate of as I said, of the Polish non-Jews is not known enough. And there is definitely this tension that people know about the Shoah, but the fact that, for example, 70,000 of the prisoners of Auschwitz, of the victims of Auschwitz were Polish non-Jews is often not known. And I think this really broadens the perspective also regarding the town itself, right? I mean, the question which is often asked, and also there's a question here, which was asked, did people know? Well, yes, people did know, because a lot of the people who lived in the town had actually some of their relatives imprisoned at Auschwitz. So this is crucial to understand, that this is not the situation that they knew and they didn't do anything. I mean, many of these people had relatives in the camp, non-Jewish. I mean, non-Jews. I'm talking about, of course, not about non-Jews. So yeah.
Arnold, we wanted to pass it to you. I think one of your students has a question speaking about hyperlocality.
Yeah. To shift gears for a second, you mentioned the home of Shimshon Kluger, and Queens College student Shabbos Kestenbaum writes the following. Rabbi Moshe Weiss, in his memoir, asserts that Shimshon Kluger was getting ready to emigrate from Poland in the early 1980s, but local reports suggest he died a shut-in and a recluse who believed the war was still going on. Can you say anything about the discrepancy between those two accounts?
Well, we never met him. He died before we opened the center, but and the story is, sort of, we don't know exactly, right? I mean, there are quite many gaps regarding this history, but as Maciek mentioned in the presentation, in the house, we own the house of Shimon Kluger. Right now, there's a cafe, there's an exhibition space, but right, as far as we know, he survived several camps during the Holocaust. Then he went to Sweden to sort of recover from the trauma from the whole experience, and then he decided to come back to Oświęcim, 1961, and he moved back into the family home, and he lived in the house until his death in 2000. We heard these sort of stories that he was afraid later, kind of closer to his death. He was afraid of the outside world, that he had some sort of nightmares about the war still being on. But at the same time, we also know that he worked for some time at this chemical factory in the town. He had non-Jewish friends, so he was taken care of by some people. So it's I think there's a bit of a sort of a legend, right, attached to it, but Yes, I mean, he was at the same time, again, later in his life, he lived a life of a recluse, of somebody who was, traumatized. And these traumas, I think, sort of got stronger when he was pretty old and sick at the end of his life.
Thank you. It is about 7 o'clock, and I think it's 1 a.m. where you both are. So we're going to close the program. Tomek, Maciek, thank you so much for your presentation. I want to thank the center, Arnold. I'm losing my losing words at this point, for the Center for Jewish Studies at Queens College, also the Museum of Jewish Heritage. They are hosting their annual gathering of remembering on Sunday, April 11th at 2 p.m. And we'll put the link in the chat for you. On behalf of the Kupferberg Holocaust Center and all of us, thank you so much. We're very grateful, and we'll see you soon. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much
Bye-bye.
again to everyone who attended. Thank you.